In this epic tale of power, ambition, and courage, Zuri stands on the brink of greatness. After a grueling journey, she faces her final opponent, Badu, in a high-stakes battle that could seal her legacy or crush her dreams. The crowd roars, the king watches from his royal box, and Mosi, the king's advisor, lurks in the shadows, plotting against her. With everything on the line, Zuri must dig deep and fight not just for herself, but for her people, her future, and the hope of a brighter tomorrow. Will she rise victorious or fall victim to the forces working against her? Watch the story of Zuri's ultimate battle and discover the fate of a true warrior. Don't miss Zuri's final showdown. Witness her rise to victory against all odds in the ultimate battle. Hit like, subscribe, and tap the notification bell so you don't miss out on this epic moment. The story. In the small, quiet village of Tem, there lived a young woman named Zuri. At 22 years old, Zuri was unlike any of the other women in the village. While most girls her age had already married or were preparing for a quiet life with families of their own, Zuri's path was different. She had always been strong, not just in body but in spirit, and from a young age, she had admired her father's skill as the village's greatest wrestler. Her father, Kofi, had taught her the ways of wrestling in secret when she was a child. It wasn't something girls were supposed to do, but Zuri was determined. She had never fit into the mold the village had set for women, and Kofi, proud of his daughter's strength, couldn't deny her the chance to learn. Now, at 22, Zuri was no longer a child. She was a woman, strong and confident, with a body honed from years of practice. But the village still held on to old traditions, and wrestling remained a man's sport. No one had ever seen a woman step into the wrestling pit, let alone challenge a man. One day, while watching a group of young men practice their wrestling moves in the village square, something stirred inside Zuri. She had spent years hiding her skills, watching from the sidelines, but the time for that had passed. She was ready to prove herself. "I want to wrestle," Zuri said loudly, stepping into the middle of the practice pit. The men stopped and turned to face her, their laughter ringing through the air. One of the boys, Tano, a cocky 18-year-old, smirked at her. "You? Wrestling with us? Go back to the kitchen, Zuri. This isn't for women." But Zuri's eyes didn't waver. She had heard these words before, and they no longer had any power over her. "Let's see if you can stop me," she challenged, her voice calm and steady. The crowd that had gathered to watch the practice murmured with excitement. It wasn't every day that someone defied traditions so openly, especially a woman. Zuri and Tano squared off, the tension in the air thick enough to cut through. Tano lunged first, underestimating Zuri's speed. She sidestepped his move easily, and in a blink, she had him pinned to the ground. The crowd erupted in gasps and whispers. No one had expected her to win, let alone so quickly. Tano, red-faced with embarrassment, scrambled to his feet and stormed off, while Zuri stood tall, her chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. She had proven herself, but her victory came with consequences. That evening, as the village gathered to discuss the day's events, the elder, Baba, stood to address the people. "This is not our way," he said gravely. "Women have never wrestled here. It is unnatural." But Zuri's father, Kofi, spoke up. "My daughter is as strong as any man in this village," he said, his voice firm. "She has trained for this all her life, and today, she proved her strength." The village was divided. Some were angry, feeling that Zuri had broken a sacred tradition, while others were in awe of her power and skill. The men, especially, felt threatened by her victory, but there was no denying what they had seen. The next day, more men came to challenge Zuri. One by one, they fell, each more humiliated than the last. Soon, word of her victory spread beyond the village, reaching the ears of Jabari, the champion wrestler of the neighboring village of Barako. Jabari was 26, tall and powerful, known for his skill in wrestling. He had never lost a match. "I hear there's a woman in Tem who thinks she can wrestle," Jabari said, his voice dripping with disdain. "I'll put an end to this foolishness." When Jabari arrived in Tem, the entire village gathered to watch the match. Zuri stood across from him in the pit, her heart steady, but her mind alert. She knew Jabari was a formidable opponent, but she wasn't afraid. She had spent years training for moments like this. The match began, and Jabari charged at her with all his strength. Zuri, quick on her feet, dodged his attack, but she could feel the weight of his power. He was stronger than anyone she had faced before. For a moment, doubt crept into her mind, but she pushed it aside. She couldn't lose. Not now. The two wrestled fiercely, the crowd silent with anticipation. Jabari's brute strength was no match for Zuri's agility and skill. With a swift move, she flipped him over her shoulder and pinned him to the ground. The village erupted in cheers, though some still watched with scowls on their faces. Zuri had done the impossible. She had defeated the strongest man anyone had ever seen. But with her victory came new challenges. That night, the elders met in secret. They were worried. Zuri's victories were inspiring others, especially the young girls, who now saw her as a hero. If women started to challenge the village's traditions, what would happen next? "We must put an end to this," one elder said, his voice sharp with anger. "Before it's too late." But Baba, the village's wisest elder, shook his head. "Zuri has shown us something important," he said quietly. "We cannot ignore her strength. Perhaps it is time for change." The next morning, a messenger arrived from the king's palace. The king himself had heard of Zuri's victories and invited her to compete in a grand tournament in the capital city. It was an honor, but it also meant that Zuri would face the greatest wrestlers in the land. As Zuri prepared to leave for the capital, her father placed a hand on her shoulder. "This is your moment," he said softly. "But remember, the challenges you face now are greater than ever." Zuri nodded, feeling the weight of her father's words. She knew that the journey ahead would test her in ways she had never imagined. But she also knew that she couldn't turn back now. She had fought too hard to stop. As she set off toward the capital, Zuri could feel the eyes of the village on her. Some were proud, others wary, but all knew that she was no longer just a village girl. She was a force of change, a symbol of something greater than herself. But little did Zuri know, the forces that awaited her in the capital were more dangerous than anything she had faced before. The wrestling matches were just the beginning. There were those who would stop at nothing to see her fail, not just because of her strength, but because of what she represented. The journey to the capital was long and difficult, but Zuri felt ready. Her feet carried her through vast fields, thick forests, and across rivers, but her mind was on the tournament. She had never seen the capital before, only heard stories about its grand buildings and bustling streets. As she walked, Amani, her childhood friend, appeared at her side, grinning as always. "I heard you're going to the king's tournament," he said, falling into step beside her. "Figured you could use some company." Zuri smiled. Amani had always been her greatest supporter, the one who believed in her even when others didn't. "I'm glad you came," she said, though her thoughts remained focused on the challenges ahead. They walked together for days, sharing stories and laughing, but Zuri could never shake the feeling of tension in the air. She knew that the capital held dangers, not just in the tournament, but also from those who wished to see her fall. She had heard whispers in the village before she left, whispers about powerful men who didn't want a woman challenging the old ways. When they finally reached the capital, Zuri was overwhelmed. The city was far bigger than she had imagined. Tall buildings made of stone stretched toward the sky, and the streets were crowded with people from all over the kingdom. The noise of merchants selling their goods, children playing, and horses clopping over the cobblestones filled the air. "This is it," Amani said, wide-eyed as they stood at the gates of the tournament arena. It was massive, with high walls and grand arches, and inside, Zuri could hear the roar of the crowd. Her heart pounded as she stepped inside. The arena was packed with spectators, and Zuri felt their eyes on her as she made her way to the preparation area. Other wrestlers, all men, were there too, stretching and preparing for their matches. They looked at her with a mix of curiosity and disdain, whispering to one another. "She's the one of them muttered. "The girl who thinks she can wrestle." But Zuri didn't let their words bother her. She was here for one reason, to win. Her first match was against a man named Kojo, a seasoned wrestler known for his brute strength. He was older than her, with thick arms and a scowl that seemed permanently etched on his face. As Zuri stepped into the ring, the crowd went silent, waiting to see if this woman could really compete with a man of Kojo's stature. The match began, and Kojo came at Zuri with all his strength. But Zuri was fast, ducking and dodging his attacks with ease. She had learned to use her opponent's size against them, and Kojo was no different. He swung at her, but she slipped under his arm and twisted him off balance. The crowd gasped as Zuri flipped him to the ground, pinning him with precision. The cheers that followed were deafening. Zuri stood over Kojo, breathing heavily but victorious. She had done it. She had won her first match in the King's tournament. But as Zuri left the ring, she noticed a figure watching her from the royal box. It was Mosi, the King's advisor, and his eyes were cold, filled with something far more dangerous than anger. Zuri could feel the weight of his gaze, and she knew that he was not just watching her performance. He was watching her every move, plotting. Later that evening, as Zuri rested in her tent, Amani came to sit beside her. "You were amazing today," he said, his face lit with excitement. "But there's something you should know. I overheard some of the men talking. Mosi isn't happy about you being here. He thinks you're a threat." Zuri frowned. "A threat? To what?" Amani looked around, lowering his voice. "To the way things are. Mosi has been advising the king for years, and he's kept the kingdom running in a way that keeps people like him in power. But you represent change, Zuri. And change is dangerous to people like Mosi." Zuri's heart sank. She had known there would be resistance, but she hadn't realized how deep it ran. "What do you think he'll do?" Amani shrugged, his smile fading. "I don't know, but whatever it is, you need to be careful." The next day, Zuri was called for her second match. This time, her opponent was a man named Issa, a fierce and skilled wrestler with a reputation for crushing his competition. The match was brutal, and Issa didn't hold back, determined to prove that a woman had no place in the ring. But Zuri fought with everything she had. She moved with precision, dodging his attacks and countering with quick, powerful strikes. The crowd watched in awe as the match went on, each move more intense than the last. Just when it seemed like Issa had the upper hand, Zuri found an opening. With a swift, calculated move, she took him down, pinning him to the ground and securing her second victory. The arena erupted in cheers, but Zuri barely heard them. Her mind was racing. As she left the ring, she caught a glimpse of Mosi again, this time speaking with a group of men in dark robes. Their faces were hidden in the shadows, but Zuri could feel the tension. Whatever Mosi was planning, it wasn't good. That night, Zuri couldn't sleep. She lay awake, thinking about everything that had happened. The matches were getting harder, and the opposition outside the ring was growing stronger. But Zuri wasn't afraid. She had come too far to give up now. The next morning, as Zuri prepared for her third match, a messenger arrived with a note. It was from Mosi. "We need to talk." It read, "Meet me at sunset by the old oak tree outside the city." Zuri's heart pounded as she read the note. Mosi wanted to meet her? Alone? She didn't trust him, but she knew she had no choice. If she wanted to understand what was happening, she had to face him. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Zuri made her way to the old oak tree. The air was cool, and the sky was streaked with shades of orange and pink. Mosi was waiting for her, his figure barely visible in the fading light. "You're causing quite a stir," Mosi said as Zuri approached, his voice smooth but cold. "The king is impressed with your skill, but there are others who aren't so pleased." Zuri crossed her arms, standing tall. "I'm not here to please anyone. I'm here to win." Mosi chuckled softly, but there was no warmth in it. "You think this is just about wrestling, don't you? But you're wrong. Your victories are a threat, Zuri. A threat to the order of things." Zuri's eyes narrowed. "What do you want from me?" Mosi stepped closer, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous intensity. "I want you to lose. Tomorrow's match. Throw the fight. Walk away." Zuri's heart raced. "Why would I do that?" "Because if you don't," Mosi said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper, I will make sure you regret it." Zuri stood frozen, her mind racing. She had worked so hard, fought so many battles to get here. She couldn't just give up. But the threat in Mosi's eyes was real, and she knew he had the power to carry it out. The choice was hers. Fight and risk everything, or walk away and lose everything she had fought for. Zuri clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. Whatever Mosi had planned, she wouldn't let him stop her. Tomorrow's match would be the most important fight of her life, and she was ready. Zuri took a deep breath, her heart pounding, but her mind clear. She stood tall in front of Mosi, her resolve unwavering. "I will not throw the match," she said calmly. "I fought too hard to give up now." Mosi's face darkened, but Zuri didn't flinch. She knew that he was used to getting his way, but she wasn't like the others who feared him. She had faced bigger challenges, inside and outside the ring, and this would be no different. "I'm warning you, Zuri," Mosi said, his voice low. "This won't end well for you." Zuri met his gaze, her voice steady. "I'm not afraid of you." Mosi narrowed his eyes, but said nothing more. He turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Zuri standing alone under the old oak tree. The weight of the moment lingered, but Zuri felt no fear. She knew the path she had chosen was the right one. The next morning, the arena was filled with spectators. Word had spread about Zuri's upcoming match, and people had traveled from far and wide to see the woman who had defied all odds. The king himself was present, sitting high above the crowd in his royal box. Zuri entered the ring, her heart steady and her mind focused. Her opponent, a man named Badu, was one of the fiercest wrestlers in the land. He towered over her, his muscles rippling as he prepared for the match. But Zuri had faced giants before, and she wasn't intimidated. The match began, and the crowd watched in silence, their eyes fixed on the two figures in the ring. Badu came at her with all his strength, but Zuri was fast and agile. She dodged his attacks with ease, using her skill and strategy to wear him down. The match was intense, but Zuri remained calm, waiting for the right moment. And then it came. In a swift, powerful move, Zuri flipped Badu to the ground, pinning him down with a final, decisive strike. The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices filling the air with excitement and awe. Zuri stood victorious, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths, but her spirit soaring. She had done it. She had won, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever doubted her. In the royal box, the king stood and applauded, his eyes filled with admiration. Zuri looked up and saw Mosi, his face a mask of anger and defeat. But Zuri didn't care. She had won on her own terms, and no one could take that away from her. After the match, the king invited Zuri to the palace, honoring her for her strength and skill. He spoke of change and how Zuri's victories had opened the door for a new era, one where people were judged not by their gender, but by their abilities. As Zuri walked through the village on her way home, the people greeted her with smiles and applause. She had not only become a champion, but a symbol of hope and possibility. She had proven that strength and courage knew no boundaries, and her journey had inspired others to believe in themselves, no matter the odds. Zuri returned to her village, greeted by her proud father and her loyal friend, Amani. Life in Tem would never be the same. Thanks to Zuri, the village had learned that tradition could evolve, and that anyone, regardless of their background, could rise to greatness. And so, Zuri's story became legend, passed down through generations as a tale of courage, determination, and the power of standing tall in the face of adversity. She had won not just a wrestling match, but a battle for change, one that would echo far beyond the walls of the wrestling pit. Years passed, and Zuri's name became known throughout the land. The story of how she defeated every man in the village, and even the king's finest wrestlers, became a tale told in every corner of the kingdom. Girls who had once been told they couldn't wrestle or compete in any sport now stood proudly in the ring, inspired by Zuri's journey. Her victories had sparked a quiet revolution, one that wasn't just about wrestling, but about the way people saw themselves and each other. Slowly, the traditions that had once confined women to certain roles began to shift. Young women were seen training in the fields, not just wrestling, but learning skills that had been reserved for men for generations. Zuri, though still young, took on the role of a mentor. She spent her days training others in her village and beyond, passing down the skills her father had taught her and the lessons she had learned through her journey. She never sought fame or recognition, only the chance to help others realize their own strength, just as she had realized hers. Amani, ever the supportive friend, remained by her side. Together, they traveled to neighboring villages, encouraging more girls and young women to step forward, to challenge the expectations placed on them. The impact of their work was undeniable, and soon, other villages began holding tournaments that included women, a practice that had been unheard of before Zuri's victories. One day, as Zuri was training a group of young wrestlers, a messenger from the capital arrived. The king had sent word, inviting Zuri to return to the city for a special event. Curious, Zuri made the journey back to the capital, where she was greeted with honor and respect. The once skeptical crowds now looked at her with admiration, and the king himself welcomed her into the palace. "I invited you here for a reason," the king said, his voice warm and genuine. "Your victories in the tournament changed more than you know. You didn't just win matches, Zuri. You helped us all see that strength and skill are not bound by gender. I want to create a permanent place for women in all the tournaments across the land, and I can think of no one better to lead that effort than you." Zuri was taken aback. The thought of leading a national movement was both exciting and daunting, but she knew this was a chance to make a lasting difference. She smiled, her heart swelling with pride and determination. "I would be honored," Zuri replied. "But this is not just about me. There are so many strong women out there, waiting for their chance. I want to help them find their own path, just as I found mine." And so, Zuri became a national figure, not just for her wrestling skill, but for her leadership in changing the way women were seen in the kingdom. She traveled far and wide, overseeing the creation of new tournaments, training centers, and programs that encouraged women to participate in all forms of physical competition. She worked closely with the king to ensure that these changes were not just symbolic, but meaningful and lasting. As the years went by, Zuri's influence grew, but she remained humble, always returning to her village when she could, to the simple life that had shaped her into the woman she had become. She never forgot where she came from or the battles she had fought to get to where she was. One evening, as Zuri sat by the fire with Amani and her father, watching the stars in the sky, she reflected on how much had changed. The village of Temb was no longer the small, quiet place it had once been. It was now known across the kingdom as the birthplace of a movement, one that had started with a single woman's courage to step into a ring and fight. "I never imagined it would be like this," Zuri said quietly, a smile playing on her lips. Kofi, her father, nodded proudly. "You changed everything, Zuri. You've shown the world what's possible when you refuse to back down." Amani grinned. "And it's only the beginning." Zuri laughed softly. She knew he was right. Her story was just one of many, and as long as there were girls and women who wanted to fight for their dreams, the movement she had started would continue to grow. The fire crackled softly, and Zuri felt a deep sense of peace. She had fought many battles, won many victories, but the greatest victory of all was knowing that she had made a difference, one that would last for generations to come. And so, Zuri's legacy lived on, not just in the wrestling pits, but in the hearts of every girl who looked up and saw a future full of possibility. She had shown them that strength comes in many forms, and that anyone, no matter where they came from, could rise up and change the world. Thanks for watching. If you're ready for more epic moments like Zuri's, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. Stay tuned for more action-packed stories, and join the journey to victory.